Horror is a delicate balance. It's a juggling act of every game element that requires total precision to be well executed. No single piece can be lacking because if one link is weak, the whole chain will break. The illusion will be shattered, and you'll realize that you aren't escaping terrifying enemies or the horror of your own psychology, you're playing a video game. The player can never realize this, at least not consciously. The audience has to buy in. We have to be sold on the idea, because when that environment is created, it acts as a garden where fear can blossom. Dead Space is a game that creates a perfect garden, one where every element is on point. It sets up a terrifying atmosphere that becomes more than just its parts individually, but those parts all working together. These cogs, well greased and oiled, work to push a pumping, fierce machine. A machine that's main purpose is to instill fear and anxiety in your heart, in the service of seeing you overcome that fear by the end of its journey. It's a masterpiece of horror, and it changed the way we look at horror design overall. Today, I'm going to dive deep into Dead Space, talking about story, gameplay, mechanics, and everything in between. If you'd like to support the channel, you can do so for free by liking this video and subscribing to the channel, as it really helps me out. You can also support the channel over on Patreon, where I upload text posts and longer versions of my full retrospectives. You can also follow me on Twitch, where I stream games that I'm not currently reviewing. Spoilers for everything Dead Space. Hey Dad, it's me, your favorite son, and today I want to talk about Dead Space. Dead Space began with a working title, originally called Rancid Moon. It was the creation of Glenn Schofield, who wanted to create a video game that was truly terrifying. He came up with the idea in 2005 and drew large inspiration from series like Resident Evil and Silent Hill. Before this, Glenn had worked on many games, mostly as art director or artist, but eventually game director. He directed games like Akuji the Heartless, Blood Omen 2, Walt Disney World Quest Magical Racing Tour, and Gex 3, Deep Cover Gecko. Glenn's team at EA Redwood Shores were working on concepts for the game, and it was a pretty big passion project for them. The studio was mostly set to work on games for licensed titles. Eventually, they pitched it to EA, and they had 3 months to create a prototype. The project was greenlit after showing the prototype to EA. They developed the prototype originally on Xbox hardware to fit time constraints and wanted to figure out how to make it work for next-gen consoles later. Dead Space was developed using the same engine as The Godfather, since the team was already familiar with working in that framework. That engine also used the Havoc physics engine, which was important for the design of Dead Space. The game was described during development as Resident Evil in space. Schofield took huge inspiration from Resident Evil 4 and wanted to create that fear and terror that it had. They wanted to improve on the formula by giving players the ability to walk and shoot at the same time. Schofield felt like RE4 could be really slow, stopping to shoot and breaking up the tension or action. Schofield took a ton of inspiration from films like Alien, The Thing, and Event Horizon. It wasn't just American films, though. Schofield specifically sought the storytelling of Takashi Miike and liked how other cultures treated horror in film. Schofield and the team used all of this information from horror films to make the game more terrifying. Everything from lighting to storytelling in the environment were ideas they got from films. The team wanted to find a really tight balance between the usual slow pace of horror games and the faster pace of third-person action games. It was meant to be a mix between the two, providing the best of both worlds. The team wanted to make the game as immersive as possible. To achieve this, they incorporated the HUD elements into the environment, and cutscenes were played in real time. This was a large change to the average horror formula, but the team didn't stop there. They also incorporated strategic dismemberment, which allowed players to sever enemies' limbs. This was a large challenge for the teams, trying to achieve the maximum amount of points on the body where an enemy could be dismembered without breaking the game. The game also incorporated procedural enemy placements so that players couldn't memorize enemy movements and attack formations. The team reached a large challenge when trying to implement zero-G in the game. They did extensive research on space exploration and survival to make it a realistic interpretation. They also wanted the atmosphere to be the star of the show. In earlier builds of the game, they relied on jump scares. They quickly realized that the effectiveness wore off soon after, and they thinned them out, focusing more on the atmosphere of the environment to instill fear. The sound was incredibly important to Schofield and his team. It was a key element to creating a terrifying atmosphere. They used real-life sounds to create fear and also got a more realized tone for the audio in the game. The team wanted all big moments in the game to be interactive. This was one of the rules that they had for the production of the game, and it couldn't be broken. This led them to a large problem with the development of the game, specifically concerning the drag tentacle. This enemy drags your character and kills you unless you kill it first. This caused huge problems and nothing was working. The sound, animations, and programming were all having issues. The issues arose from the character being in a different position when walking into the hallway. They used layering to solve the issue, dealing with each problem individually to find the source. This was a new management strategy that they had implemented. They ended up having a specific team just for this one tentacle scene. This whole issue stopped development for an entire month, causing a massive slowdown, but the team eventually overcame the problem. Schofield and the team wanted the main character to be an everyman. They wanted him to be just another guy and make you feel like you were him. He doesn't talk in the game, and he's always in frame, making you feel more connected to the character. The entire development of Dead Space was something that was difficult and challenging. The team had not created anything of this size thus far, but a lot was learned, and these challenges were all overcome. The outcome was something handcrafted and of high quality. No shortcuts were taken here. Dead Space was released in North America for the Sony PlayStation 3 and the Microsoft Xbox 360 on October 13th, 2008. As usual, a few notes before we get into things. I played Dead Space on the Xbox Series S using its backwards compatibility feature. This was the easiest and most convenient way to get footage for this game, and it also happens to run pretty smoothly. All three Dead Space games are also on PC, but those versions of the games are a little more finicky than the console version. The second note is on the structure of this review. If you've seen my videos before, you'll know that I try to tailor the structure of each review to the game that I'm playing. For Dead Space, that's no different. Dead Space functions quite a bit like Silent Hill. A lot of the story is told through optional logs and information that's unlocked at the end of the game. Most of the story is right in front of us, but the mystery of the tale and the station that we're playing on is left up to the player to piece together. Because of this, I'll first talk about the story, gameplay, and mechanics of the game, giving my overall impressions. I'll then venture back at the end to talk about what really happened in Dead Space. I also want to give a quick note about the footage that I used for this video. I intermixed footage from both my first and second playthroughs of Dead Space. You might see some footage in the beginning of the game from my second playthrough on New Game Plus, where I have a white suit. I just wanted to point out that I didn't cheat or anything, I just did multiple playthroughs. Dead Space begins with a message from Nicole. This is our main character, Isaac's girlfriend, or was, we're not sure. Isaac is on a mission with two others, Kendra Daniels, a computer specialist, and Zach Hammond, the chief security officer. They are trying to board the USG Ishimura, a large flagship that Nicole is supposedly on. They're on a mission, responding to a distress signal on the Ishimura. They try to dock, but the automatic procedure is disabled, and the ship is badly damaged in the process. All the while, Hammond and Daniels are bickering because Kendra won't follow Hammond's orders. Regardless, the ship lands and the power seems to be out all across the place, and there's no signs of life as of yet. Our main character, Isaac, happens to be the ship's engineer and is sent to check on the ship's vitals. The outlook isn't great, but as he checks outside the room, the place is locked down and strange creatures begin to attack the crew, killing Johnston and Chen, two corporals assisting with the mission. We're forced to run away from the creatures here and head to a nearby elevator. Heading through the ship, we find dead bodies, strange scenes of messages scrawled in blood on the walls, and our first weapon, the plasma cutter. This is our main way of dispensing with enemies in Dead Space. The alien creatures that we fight can be dismembered, and take way more damage when doing so. We can also slow them down by taking out their legs or inhibit their ability to attack by taking out their arms. Each weapon in the game has 2 modes of attack that can be switched out by using the right bumper. In the case of the plasma cutter, this is attacking horizontally or vertically. The plasma cutter is probably one of my favorite weapons in the game and really functions as the bread and butter of our attacks for most of this entry. It's old reliable, and coming back to it is always something you can depend on. Like I said before, the team did away with the HUD in Dead Space. Because of this, Isaac's health is represented on his suit in the world rather than a menu sitting at the bottom of the screen. This allows for much more immersion in the world and really makes you feel like you're in the character's shoes rather than playing a video game. This does exactly what I was talking about earlier, break down the wall of immersion to instill fear in the player. We take out our first necromorph and head to the tram station. Here we're contacted by Hammond, who isn't dead at all. They're just as clueless as us about the origins of these monsters and the situation with the Ishimura. The goal is to get to the bridge, but before they can do that, we need to repair the tram system that runs through the ship. It's the only way they'll be able to get around and make it to the different areas of the vessel. Kendra isn't as keen on the idea of trying to fix the ship, she just wants to get out. Hammond tells Isaac that if he fixes the tram, he'll help find Nicole on the ship. We realize that Isaac has a personal stake in what happens on this mission. He didn't just come here for his job, he came here to see if she was all right. We have to venture into the ship to try and replace the tram car with a different one. On the way, we're introduced to Stasis, one of 2 suit powers that we'll be able to use in the game. This gives us a small meter on our suit that allows us to slow down an object's speed and time. We use this to solve many different puzzles in the game, but we can also use it on particularly fast enemies to deal with them easier. We have to get 2 arms to grab the damaged tram and pull it out, but one of the arms only stays in place for a second. We have to use stasis and eject the tram in time. All the while, we're being attacked by necromorphs coming out of the vents. This is how they travel around the ship, attacking from all sides. The sound of Dead Space is one of the biggest things that makes the game truly terrifying. We know exactly when an enemy has entered the room because of the sound. The score notifies us, a large, jumpy, scraping sound, a rising in intensity of the music, and the gurgles of nearby beasts trying to take our life. After playing for long enough, this becomes subconscious. You hear the noise of a coming threat, and you begin searching, scanning the room for where it could have come from. Dead Space doesn't hold back, though. It has no qualms throwing enemies behind you when you're dealing with another. Once the fighting has begun, there's no way to tell how many are coming your way. It's terrifying, and you always feel truly alone, out in the open, vulnerable. Now that we've got the tram replaced, we have to call it. But first, we have to get to the computer online, because of course, it's broken. We head to the storage room first. We enter a large room here, with multiple walkways going either way. This is always a troubling situation, because without scanning the room, there's no way to know whether there's another enemy waiting at the other end. It's terrifying, and Dead Space never makes you truly feel safe. There are moments of relief, sure, but we never truly feel like we can relax. Isaac grabs a new data board for the computer, and we're introduced to the bench, Dead Space's main upgrade system. We can collect power nodes throughout the game, mostly in containers placed on walls. They can also be dropped from enemies or bought from the store, though. We can use these nodes to unlock different paths for our weapons, suit, or kinesis and stasis modules. We can upgrade our health through the suit or the damage output of weapons, and even their reload speed. We have to backtrack now, heading to the computer that we started at. We replace its board and call the tram for Hammond and Daniels. They head to the bridge to find out what happened to the ship. The lockdown has also been lifted, so some of the doors have been unlocked. Kendra again questions Hammond's ability to get them out of this situation, but he is dedicated to the mission and puts her in her place. Isaac heads back to the Kellyan to try and start the engines and get ready for their departure. We're attacked by multiple beasts on our way there, and when Isaac tries to start the ship, it explodes in a fiery blaze. The damage it endured during docking was clearly too much. We're assaulted by multiple monsters on the dock, even a new type, the Leaper. These are almost long, lizard-like creatures, a disgusting warping of the human body. They jump at you and attack with their tails. Kendra is distraught about the destruction of the Kellyan, their only way out now gone. Hammond decides to try and fix the ship, but they need Captain's authorization first. The Captain is already dead, so we need to get his codes to continue. Hammond sends the tram back to us so we can head back to the medical deck, where the Captain's body is at. We see the two attacked by a Leaper before we're cut off from them. We head to the tram and get our first store in the game. Here we can buy items like ammo for our weapons, new suits or weapons themselves, health packs, stasis packs, or anything else we'll need on our adventure. We can also sell equipment or items that we find here to get more credits. We take the tram to the medical bay and find a blindfolded woman on the ground, laying beside a mangled body. She gives us something before dying on the floor. Here, we receive the second of our 2 suit powers, the Kinesis module. This lets us grab and move large objects from a distance. This is also a puzzle-solving power. We'll have to use it for many different puzzles and traversal throughout the game, but it can also be used to grab and throw things at enemies. It's especially useful when grabbing an exploding canister and blowing up multiple monsters at once. Hammond contacts us again. He got separated from Kendra. We need to get past a barricade in the medical wing. The only way to do so is to blow it up. We have to get thermite and a shock pad. Inside the medical offices, we find a strange video recording of 2 people from the ship talking about something called the Marker. Heading through the rooms, we find a crew member alive, but he's quickly killed by a new monster type, the Lurker. These are small enemies that can crawl on walls and ceilings. They sprout 3 tentacles that shoot projectiles at us and can be incredibly annoying. The best way to deal with them, though, is to dismember each tentacle, usually killing them. We find the thermite upstairs and head towards the shock pad. I just want to comment quickly on Dead Space's environment. Its lighting is incredibly well done and does a lot to add to the atmosphere of the game. Lights flickering in certain rooms, orange flashing to initiate a quarantine, total darkness in some areas. It's atmospheric and terrifying. We're always sort of in the dark, but this dim light or these flickering ones make us feel unease. When we're in areas that are actually well lit, we almost feel a brief reprieve. The audience relaxes because maybe, just for a moment, we might be safe. When the enemies swarm the medical offices, the room darkens because of a lockdown. This is a hectic moment. We have to fight off lots of monsters coming from all directions. Our senses are assaulted and the anxiety is on high. When we clear the room, the lockdown is lifted and we're allowed to breathe for a moment. The music subsides and the light brightens again. We're never told that we're safe. We just assume it. We can feel it. The game conveys tone through its environment to provide an incredible effect on the player, manipulating their emotions. We find a crew member smashing his head against the wall until he's dead. We also find a doctor's examination of a patient on the colony from the planet beneath. We can collect and pick up a lot of items in Dead Space. It's really what we rely on. We can't buy every piece of ammo or health in the game. We'd simply run out of credits and supplies. We can pick up items from lockers, ammo, health, schematics to unlock new things in the shop. Enemies drop items. We'll find them everywhere, encouraging us to explore every room, every nook and cranny. We can use power nodes to unlock special rooms in the game that usually have huge caches of ammo and equipment, but also will sometimes have optional audio logs or memos that fill in our gaps of what happened on the Ishimura. Here, we have to use our new Kinesis power to move a platform into place and place a battery into a slot, powering an elevator, as well as defeat multiple different necromorphs. Here, we enter our first vacuum, probably one of the most terrifying experiences in this game. The sound goes completely dead. We can only hear the faint thumps of Isaac's steps or the subdued pangs of a shot from the plasma cutter. Encountering enemies in these spaces are even worse situations. Remember how we talked about how our biggest indicator to an enemy's presence is sound, atmosphere, the feeling? Well, that's gone in a vacuum, only being able to rely on our sight. When in a vacuum, we have a certain amount of air, which slowly decreases. We have minimal time before we need to refill our O2 at a station, or get out of the vacuum. I love these experiences so much. Not only is our anxiety high because we're trying to get out, but we're also trying to figure out if any monsters are nearby and defeat them as quick as possible. We also immediately get our first taste of zero-G here. Certain rooms won't have gravity enabled on the ship. We can aim at a spot and jump to it. This is great for traversing across a room to get to an objective, or even solving puzzles later on. The zero-G can get a little wonky in certain circumstances, like when running through a curved pipe, the camera likes to go nuts. In this room, we find the shock pad and are attacked by necromorphs on our way out. Isaac backtracks to the barricade and blows it up, allowing him access to the medical bay. Suddenly, we receive a transmission from Nicole, a ship-wide communication asking for help. It seems like this is from before, not something current. In the morgue, we're assaulted by more enemies and find a woman sawing a human patient open, eventually taking the saw to her own neck. When we arrive at the morgue, we see a strange creature, a new enemy called the Infector, feed on a dead body. The Infectors transform dead humans into powered-up necromorphs. Getting these guys and killing them before they can transform others is paramount when we encounter them. The worst thing we can face is a room full of powered-up necromorphs. We find the captain's body and his access codes with it. Hammond starts to access the captain's records while we head back to the tram station. In the morgue is a strange language scrawled on the walls in blood. Hammond contacts us and says that he got attacked, but trapped one of the monsters in an escape pod. When Hammond looks at the ship's records, he says that the mutations on the ship aren't an infection, but a form of alien life. It arose when the ship cracked the planet below open. Worse news is that the ship's engines are offline, and the ship is falling in orbit. We need to head to the engineering deck next. We take the tram there. Each level functions in a pretty similar way. We usually take the tram to a new wing and are introduced to a small base area, which usually has a bench, a store, and a save point. This is kind of our breather area, the place we can recover and upgrade our weapons, strengthening ourselves. It's a point of relaxation, but that's not entirely true. Even these hub areas are not off limits to Dead Space. We'll see enemies in the hub areas from time to time, and the first time this happened to me, it was the most jarring thing. I realized in an instant that I wasn't safe anywhere. The biggest thing that Dead Space does is make you feel vulnerable. You quickly realize that everywhere is a danger zone. There is a run button in the game, but for the first half you almost don't even want to use it because you don't know what's around each corner. It's terrifying to turn past it and see nothing or something. The anticipation is what kills in this game. You're out in the open and you know that you'll be attacked. You just don't know when or from where. The game will hide monsters in piles of bodies so that you can't see them. They'll come from the vents behind you, above you. Anywhere they can attack, they will. It's this constant assault from the minute that we start playing the game that instills a certain anxiety in you from the start. There were so many times that I opened up the store, heard enemies on the other side of the door beside me, and closed it to check my surroundings before trying to buy something. When a game can make you terrified to buy ammo, you know it's done its job as a horror. We have two jobs in this area, to refuel the engines and get the gravity centrifuge working. In our new hub, we find a man dead in his chair. Tons of audio and text logs document the downfall of the ship. Crew members turning on each other, people trying to survive in this place. We have to take a gondola across a large chasm to refuel the engines. When we head back to the hub, an infector has gotten in and turned that dead guy into a necromorph, once again soiling our supposed safe area. We head to the centrifuge. On the way, we find a decontamination chamber. Here, the room is locked down and we're assaulted by a variety of enemies. This was one of the heights of fear for me, a shining moment in the horror that is Dead Space. The lights are shut off. It's almost complete darkness. The room isn't even square. We can't be sure where the threats are going to come from. We have to be prepared from all angles. Eventually, they drop from the ceiling. If we're dealing with one monster, we might be assaulted by another. It's a terrifying moment in the game. There's two types of horror in Dead Space: fear and anxiety. The fear is the classical description of horror, something creeping, crawling, the blood on the walls, gurgling sounds off in the distance. It's the atmosphere, the anticipation of the fight, the psychological. The other type of horror is anxiety. This is the fight or flight feeling, not when we're anticipating the fight, but when we're actually in it. The moment when we're swarmed by enemies. We've worried about the situation to come, but now we have to deal with it. This is a much more visceral fear, one that we experience in our bones. In the decontamination chamber, our anxiety is on full display. Once we defeat the enemies, we can make our way to the centrifuge. Here we have to use stasis on two large objects, moving them into the center of the room to start the machine. Once we boot it up, space opens underneath us and we have to avoid the spinning blade in the center, defeating enemies in a vacuum once more. When we get out, we're attacked by the drag tentacle, the one we talked about so much in the development section, a shock to the system. Kendra contacts us once again. She's alive. She's barricaded in the computer core. She found corroborating evidence that the colonists below were experiencing dementia from something called the Marker, an artifact found on the planet. She sends us next to fuel storage to access the engine chamber. On our way back, we head through a section of the ship, machines pumping incredibly loud in our ears. This juxtaposition is presented quite a bit throughout Dead Space, the comparison between the pumping sounds of the ship's equipment and the sounds of the monsters that inhabit it. Possibly faking us out, possibly commenting on the fact that this biological species functions exactly like a machine. When we reach the engine room, Isaac restarts the equipment. Hammond contacts to say that the engines are working and the ship is rising in orbit. Kendra has bad news, though. The asteroid defense systems are offline. We need to get them back or the rocks will destroy us. Kendra confronts Hammond about the Marker, thinking that he knew about it all along and didn't tell them. She basically accuses him of lying. Apparently, the Marker is in the cargo hold on the ship. We have to get to the captain's nest to get the asteroid systems online. We finally reunite with Hammond, and he says he truly doesn't know about the Marker. He also says we need to reroute power to the ADS system. On the way out, we see an escape pod that houses the necromorph Hammond trapped. He jettisons it into space. Upstairs, we're confronted by our first brute. These are massive, hulking beasts that are incredibly strong. We have to stun them with attacks from the front and attack their back when they go to cover. The best way to take care of them is to use stasis to freeze them once they go for cover and rip into their back. We head through, rerouting power in multiple different junction boxes to the ADS. We eventually encounter our first pregnant necromorph. These have tons of swarmers in their stomach. If we shoot the stomach, swarmers descend on us and they can be a real problem. The only way to take it out is to tear its legs and arms away. After we get the last junction box, Hammond says the ADS targeting is down. We need to manually aim it, so we have to head to the cannon pit. To get there, we have to cross outside the ship, though. We have to jump through 0G from cover to cover, making sure that the asteroids don't shred us to pieces, or that we don't run out of air. There's another fear that Dead Space plays on. Not just the fear of monsters, the dark or flickering lights, but that of space. We're constantly thrown into the vast vacuum, the void that is outer space. One of the most terrifying things is hearing Isaac's chokes and gasps as his body begs for air. It's visceral and terrifying, watching your character die wanting for oxygen. It's a strange sort of fear, one more of death than anything else, but it's one that the game forces on us nonetheless. Here we have a really odd game segment. There's 2 of these in Dead Space. We have to man a turret and shoot asteroids as they run into the hull of the ship. I'll be honest, I think this was one of the very few weak points for Dead Space. This is where it started to veer into an action game a little bit. They are very short moments, so I don't fault the overall product that much for this one section, but I do think they're a bit out of place. We defend the ship from asteroids, and Hammond gets the autopilot working, allowing the ship to do its own work. Kendra calls and says that the oxygen is being poisoned by something in the hydroponics department. We have to get rid of it because there won't be any air to breathe soon. Kendra is going to come up with a poison to destroy it, but we have to get there first. Once we get to medical, Kendra says the contaminated air is spreading. We have to find the chemicals to mix the poison. Inside the main room, we hear a man speaking to us through the sound system. Kendra says someone has reprogrammed the door locks. Someone else is here. I've talked pretty great about Dead Space so far, so I think I'll take this moment to point out a bit of a negative. The game reuses quite a bit of environments. We'll see the same room or area reused multiple times, just with more or less blood, objects, and moving pieces. I don't think it would be that bad, but some of the areas are very distinct, so they're pretty easily recognizable. I can mostly forgive this though because the game was so detailed for its time, and every area being completely unique probably wasn't too realistic. We eventually find a lab that has the chemical we need to make the poison, but now we need to find a DNA sample to mix it with. Unfortunately, someone has showed up. He tells us fighting against all this is pointless. He's some type of scientist and wants to show us his greatest creation, humanity's child, the thing that will replace us. Just then, the hunter crashes out of its nearby tube. This is an enemy that can't be killed. Even if we sever all of its limbs, it'll only be briefly downed while it regenerates those limbs pretty quickly. This introduces a whole host of new anxiety to the game and atmosphere of Dead Space. It doesn't matter where we go or what we do from here on out. We know that this thing could jump out of any corner and ruin our time. But why is it so terrifying? Because we know when it's around, our reprieve from the terror is a long way away. Even when we fight waves and waves of enemies, at least we know once we kill them, it'll be over soon, and we can breathe. With the hunter, we know it's never over. We have to run from it and make our way through the corridors. Hammond calls us to say that the infected air is getting to him. We had to look for a DNA sample, but we encountered the scientist again. He says that everyone should die for their cause. There's nothing we can do against this insurmountable wall. As we head through the next room, the hunter appears again. We have to defeat multiple enemies while also fending it off. We can shoot off its limbs and slow it down with stasis, but that's only temporary. We make it to the next room and find a guardian. These are beasts that are growing from the walls. They spit out smaller creatures that can shoot projectiles. They're pretty dangerous because if we get too close, we're automatically decapitated. And also, their screams are terrifying. We eventually find a DNA sample in the scientist's office. He has severed heads that he's captured, and scrawlings cover his walls. He interrupts our communication with Kendra to tell us that we should accept our fate. He decompresses the deck, causing us to enter a vacuum everywhere. We have to get to the security station to get the air back. We get the life support back online, but now we have to mix the sample. Kendra says that some massive beast has entered the colony from outside. That's when the air quality went down. Someone on the ship called it the Leviathan. We mix the sample, and now we have to head to hydroponics to use it. We find the scientist again, blocking our way to the tram. He says his name is Dr. Chalice Mercer. He wants to show us his plan in full and leaves us with his creation. The hunter is back again, but this time we can get rid of it, at least for a while. We have to defeat it by locking it in the freezing chamber, using stasis and activating the room. Once this is done, we don't have to deal with it for a while. We head into the tram and head for hydroponics. When we arrive, we find Hammond injured in the area. He's been breathing the contaminated air and won't survive for long. He says the crew on the deck are transformed and are contributing to poison in the air. These are wheezers. In each area, we have to find multiple wheezers and take them out. This will clear the air and make it breathable. Most of this takes place in an incredibly open plant room. Like I said before, these open rooms are our worst enemy. Corridors in Dead Space can be dealt with. Trust me, They're terrifying, but there's really only two places enemies can come from, in front of us or behind us. In a large open room, they can come from anywhere. It's incredibly easy to get overwhelmed and feel exposed, vulnerable. Dead Space does a great job at accomplishing this goal, making you feel like you're alone and about to be attacked from all angles. It's almost like the game purposefully manipulates every possible fear that you could have. It sinks its teeth into the core of your feelings and uses them against you. Through this area, we'll also encounter exploders. These are small, lanky creatures that lumber towards us. They have a pod on their arms, and if shot, it will explode. This explosion is pretty large and damaging. It can be used to give us the upper hand in a firefight, but it can also destroy us. We have to run through multiple areas, traverse through 0G, and take out tons of enemies to eventually destroy the last of the Weezers. This allows us to recycle the air and clean most of the contamination, but it will never be gone until we destroy the Leviathan. This is our first real boss fight in Dead Space, and it comes about halfway through the game. The Leviathan has 3 tentacles at the beginning of the fight. When they expose their pods, we have to destroy them and get rid of each. After that, the center of the Leviathan will begin shooting its own exploding pods at us. We have to use kinesis to shoot them back into its mouth. After we do this a few times, the tentacles will return to try and stop us, but damaging the center enough will kill the thing. The boss is terrifyingly large. It's eldritch in size and shape. It looks like something that's too large for us to comprehend. It's designed very well, but it's also a great fight. It keeps in theme with the immersion that the team was trying to create. No boss health bars, no UI, just us having to intuit what to do to defeat the thing. With it destroyed, the oxygen levels are back to normal, but Hammond is not responding. Kendra wants us to head to the SOS beacon to try and send a distress call to other ships. We take the tram towards it. Our goal is to attach the SOS beacon to an asteroid that's being smelted. We can launch the asteroid out into space and hopefully someone will be able to find it. So, I know I said that there are no safe spaces truly in Dead Space, but I lied. Up until this point in the game, elevators have been pretty much the safest place we could be. When we're traveling in them, we're not attacked generally. Even in the first few minutes of the game, it's established that elevators are a safe area. When a necromorph tries to attack us on the elevator and is beheaded. But in this area, even this is taken away from us. As we take the elevator down to the lower levels, we're assaulted by multiple enemies dropping into the top of the open mining elevator. It's a rough experience because it's another reminder by the game developers that you are not safe. On the next floor, we have to clear boulders from a room to be able to get through. We have to use our kinesis to shoot them into a gravity beam. We get a mining access key to let us into the other areas of this level. We use a gondola to cross a large space and are assaulted from all sides by enemies shooting projectiles at us. Once we reach the other side, we finally see Nicole.
Isaac? Is that really you? It feels like it's been so long. But I can help you now. Come with me.
The beacon is nearby, but Nicole has to disable the lock. We have to protect her from the other side, killing all of the enemies that try to attack her and us. She says she'll find a way to Isaac and tells him she loves him before heading off. We find the SOS beacon and head to the mining bay. In the subdeck, we have to release all 4 gravity tethers that are holding the asteroid in place. We have to use stasis to slow them down and then shoot one of their capacitors. 2 of the tethers are inside the ship, but the other 2 are outside. We have to 0G jump onto the asteroid and walk around it, avoiding the incredibly dangerous rings circulating the thing. I love these huge, massive rooms and set pieces. They always just look so grandiose. Not only does it make you feel like you're seeing something so incredibly massive and beautiful, but it also makes you wonder exactly how many people were working on this ship. The vast crews of people that made this thing run, that had lives on this vessel, all gone, void of any life. It feels hollow now. Once we destroy the tethers, we can place the beacon and launch the asteroid. Kendra says that she's started to see her brother again, even though she knows he isn't alive. Our next goal is to fix the communications array so that people can respond to the distress beacon. We head back to the tram once again. Kendra says that a military ship, the USM Valor, just shocked in next to them. We can't communicate with them until we get the comms array working, though. Kendra says that she thinks someone is listening in on their communications. We finally reach the array, but a lot of the dishes have been damaged. We have to use kinesis to arrange them in a ring so that they can start working again. Once we do this, we receive a comm from one of the people aboard the USM Valor. He says they picked up our escape pod, the one that Hammond jettisoned. Great. It's an automated response that repeats every 30 seconds. Kendra needs to communicate with the ship to try and get in contact with them and warn them about the necromorph. She needs to get the blast doors open to boost the signal, though, and there's something blocking the way. We have another strange cannon segment where we have to shoot down different tentacles from a large beast that's blocking the blast doors. Again, I think this is just a little action-y for the tone that the game was setting previously, and is an odd addition to the game that it probably would have survived without. It definitely isn't game-breaking, it just disrupts the flow a little bit. Once it's defeated, Kendra tries to contact the Valor to tell them not to open the escape pod, but they won't respond. We see their video feed of one of their men being attacked, and the ship is floating straight towards us. Isaac is knocked out from the blast and wakes up to the same message from Nicole as before. It quickly switches to Hammond. He's still alive and says that his signal has been blocked this whole time. He finally decides to abort the mission. They all have to get out. He found a shuttle on the crew deck. It needs a new core, though, that we can salvage from the USM Valor. I should probably talk about the weapons of Dead Space. We've already talked about the plasma cutter, but there are many more weapons we can collect in the game, being able to equip 4 at the same time. The 4 I used mostly stayed with me throughout the game. The plasma cutter was obviously my mainstay. It's accurate and reliable. It can be used to easily sever appendages, and when it's upgraded all the way, it can do some real damage, even being such a small weapon. The second one I used the most was the line gun. This was a pretty close second favorite to the plasma cutter. It basically functions like the plasma cutter, shooting a horizontal bolt at the enemies, but it's much wider. It can devastate enemies, even though it holds much less ammo, and finding it is more difficult. The pulse rifle was my third favorite. It's mostly a generic fast-shooting rifle with a lot of ammunition and a big clip. It can be used to success even on bigger enemies, but is a little harder to target limbs without wasting a bunch of ammo. My least favorite weapon I used was the Ripper. I don't really know why I kept this one on me the entire game, but I did. I think it was mostly because I had so much ammo for it, and I just kept finding the most ammo for that gun throughout the game. It was an insane amount, so I couldn't just put it away. Through most of the game, it was a terrible gun. It shoots out blades that hover in front of you for a brief period. You can guide the blade and use it to slice enemies apart. Its secondary shot just fires a projectile blade out from the weapon, though. I really made it a point to upgrade this weapon in the later game, when ammo was becoming an issue. You'll be forced at certain points in the game to exhaust your entire arsenal, as you only have so much ammo for each weapon. These moments can get really intense because you're swapping through all your weapons only to realize you have to use the Ripper to defeat this wave of enemies. The weapon wasn't a bad idea, it just doesn't do that much damage from the get-go, so upgrading it is a must if you're going to use it. Once you do, it can actually function pretty well, but it requires a lot of nodes, and you might be better off just using those for your suit or plasma cutter. I do enjoy the arsenal and variety in weapons that you're presented with in Dead Space. It does feel like certain weapons were designed for certain enemies, so you always have a tool to deal with the situation that you're presented with. We head to the tram and make our way towards the Valor. Hammond thinks that the Valor was sent to destroy the ship, not save them. He's cut off before he can finish, and Kendra says they lost his signal. The Valor is sticking into the side of the ship, but it's locked, and we have to dispense with the radioactive orbs that fell out of its weapons during the crash. Inside the Valor, the military men that have been infected were already wearing stasis units in their body armor when they died. This has been merged into their body when they were infected, creating hyper-fast necromorphs. These guys are very threatening, but the best way to take them down is to use stasis to slow them and rip them apart quickly. The whole ship is a mess. It's burning and sheared in half. We have to make our way through the broken and shattered vessel. We eventually receive a transmission from a man named Dr. Terrence Kine. He wants us to help him by repairing the shuttle. He says that humanity will be wiped out unless we return the marker to it. We can't just run. Inside the military base, we encounter an odd little shooting range that will reward us for completing stages. This is the real safe area. We eventually get to the room that the core is in, but the engines are firing inside of it. We have to use turbines to make our way down the hall and shut them off. Once we get the core, Kendra tells us to head to the crew deck. We finally see Hammond again, but he's being chased by a brute. He's on the other side of the glass, though, and he's killed. We defeat the brute ourselves and head out. As we leave, the ship begins to explode. Kendra found the shuttle that Hammond was talking about, but the navigation cards have been removed. We have to get 3 of them on the crew deck, and we'll be able to use the shuttle to leave. Entering the main area of this deck, we see tons of bodies with white wraps around their faces, shot in the head. We find Dr. Chalice as he kills a man, a believer, he calls them. We encounter a new enemy while looking for the nav cards, dividers. These are very tall, lanky creatures that, when we kill them, spawn multiple smaller enemies. They're tough, but can be taken out easily at range. We get contacted by Dr. Kine again, and he wants to talk to us after we have the nav cards. Dead Space has something truly great. It's sort of an undefinable quality. Most would call it atmosphere, but I think it's different than that. I call it a feeling. This feeling delivers terror and fear, surely. It creates an environment that is hostile, aggressive, depressing, and oppressive. It's terrifying to be in this world for any period of time, but why is that? It's because of this feeling that you get while playing it. This feeling can be described by all of the parts that make it, the ones that we've already talked about at depth. The lighting that dredges up childhood fears of the dark, the sound that makes you remember your terror of things that go bump in the night, the horrifying creatures lumbering at you around every corner. This dire situation that you spend the entire game trying to get out of. But this feeling isn't just these parts. It's all of these things combined and placed perfectly that creates something completely different. The feeling. One that permeates every second of gameplay. It's relentless. It's horrific. It's graphic. It's the heights that horror games aspire to. The delicate balance that we talked about at the beginning of the video is here. The scales of justice have been evened. The teeter-totter is at a flawless center. The pencil is resting perfectly in the center of your finger. It works just right. Isaac eventually finds another nav card and an extremely fun minigame in the process. Apparently the crew of the Ishimura like to play Z-ball. This is basically basketball in 0G. We can jump around to platforms to increase our multiplier and shoot the ball into one of the 4 baskets to get more points. It gives us some rewards for completing each round. In the next room, we see a spinning video of Chalice speaking to some believers who have turned their back on the faith. We find a section of kinesis movable bunk beds that we have to navigate through. We find the final nav card and Chalice contacts us to say his creation is back, reborn. The hunter has returned and we have to run. Escaping back into the bunk section is incredibly terrifying with this thing at our back, and we have no idea if it'll be able to get through or not. We have to stay alive in the next room while Kendra gets the door unlocked. Kine congratulates us on getting the nav cards and tells us to meet him. Kendra says that the man might be unstable and violent, to be careful around him. Kine tells us that escape is impossible, that the shock point drive on the shuttle is downed. Kine is clearly raving, but he shows us a video of a massive beast called the Hive Mind that came from the core of the planet. It controls the necromorphs telepathically. He claims that the marker contains the Hive Mind, and if we return to the planet, it can be trapped again. Our only choice now is to get the marker back to the planet and end this thing. We start the engines of the shuttle and the hunter returns, but we're going to take it out for good. We have to trap it behind the shuttle's exhaust and burn it. We can do this by cutting its legs off and hitting it with stasis, running back and starting the engines. Kyne arrives and takes the shuttle over to the flight deck so that we can grab the marker and load it up. Chalice contacts us and once again tells us to accept our fate as he lets an infector attack him. We see this happening in the next room and have to defeat this newly changed Chalice, which is all the same as the rest. Kyne tells us to head to the cargo bay so that we can get the marker to the hangar. The cargo bay is terrifyingly open. There are so many points of entry for enemies, and at this point in the game, they're all pretty fast. We never know which direction we're going to get attacked from, paranoid looking every way to locate the nearest threat. Tentacles will even attack us from underneath the platforms. Our goal here is to move the marker from one end to the other, and then send it up to the hangar. We head up to the flight deck, back to where we started the game at. We turn off gravity and have to move the marker to the ship, all the while defending ourselves from multiple assaults by different monsters. Once we get it in position, we restore gravity to the room so Kyne can load it. He invites us onto the ship so we can stop this once and for all, but he's killed just before we step on. The shuttle takes off, someone else inside. We realize it's Kendra. She was an agent with the Earth government. The planet was an experiment and the marker was made by humans. They reverse engineered it from a different artifact and activated it on the planet. The system has been sealed, but since the CEC got involved, they had to stop it. The game really throws us off her tail the entire time because she's constantly mistrusting Hammond, who we actually think is the traitor. Nicole calls us at this point. She's in the control room, ready to help. We find her upstairs and she apologizes for what she did to Isaac before. She tells us to pull the shuttle back, piloting it from here, and says something strange.
Make us whole again. Make us whole again.
All of the monitors have that strange language flashing on them. We pull the shuttle back, but Kendra flees to the planet below in the escape pod. We head downstairs to get on the shuttle, our second to last chapter ending with us getting on a ship, not a tram. Down there, Nicole joins us and tells Isaac she's happy they're back together. We finally head down to the planet and put the marker onto a loader so we can take it to the planet crack and seal the hive mind controlling everything. Throughout this whole level, we have to move the marker along a track with kinesis. We have to get bridges and doors out of its way and take it to the center of the colony. We're attacked by huge swarms of enemies, every single variation that we've seen so far. Just massive waves of them come plummeting at us. We eventually find the hive mind sticking out of the ground and take the marker up to it. We see Nicole. She says thank you and that we're whole again. The marker activates and we have to get out of the area because it's about to explode. As we enter the decontamination chamber, Kendra arrives, taking the marker with her. She calls Isaac insane and tells us to look again at the video that Nicole sent. This time, we watch to the end and see that she injected herself with some sort of poison. She's dead. Kendra says we were experiencing hallucinations. Isaac was just a pawn this whole time, manipulated by the marker. We head back to the shuttle, but as Kendra tries to board, she's killed by the hive mind, and we have to fight it. It has pods on its mouth that we have to destroy to damage it. During the whole fight, we have to avoid its massive tentacles that try to slam us to the ground. After we destroy its mouth pods, we have to tackle the ones in its chest. The tentacles get more aggressive here. Once we destroy all the pods, the hive mind collapses and slinks back into the planet. I really like this final boss, and I don't mind it being a huge action set piece. I think the final boss should be. It should really ramp up the stakes for the end of the game and take it to the max. That's exactly what the hive mind does. After it's defeated, Isaac flies the shuttle out of orbit. He's seen piloting the ship and he finally takes his mask off. He briefly watches the video of Nicole before stopping it. Just before the end, Isaac sees Nicole again, jumping from the side of the ship. Dead Space is truly one of a kind. It was a game that purposefully tried to innovate, and the team would accept nothing less. It's a landmark and a touchstone in the history of horror games. It changed what horror games would be for years to come. You can see the influence all over the space horror games today. I think it really raised the bar for horror games moving forward, and was one of the last true horror games of its era. It created a feeling and a sense that stuck with you the entire time, the feeling that something wasn't right. It's almost like you become in tune with the game at a certain point. The game is speaking another language and you realize exactly what it's telling you. You know when to run. You know when to fight. It's working on another level to manipulate your senses. Isaac may have been a pawn for the marker, but we feel like a pawn to Glenn Schofield. It feels like he's pulling every string, eliciting every reaction inside. The terror, the fear, the anxiety, it's all perfectly placed. We're given incredibly brief moments of reprieve that we know subconsciously won't last long and aren't real, but they still feel substantial when we want anything, just even one more breath. It's a fantastic horror experience and one that needs to be played. We've talked about the game in its entirety, but I'm sure that you could tell there's a lot more to the story of Dead Space. So what really happened on the colony and to the USG Ishimura? The captain of the ship was secretly an agent of the Church of Unitology. This is a religion that is based on the belief that humans were created by some sort of divine alien race or being. They also believe that they'll all be unified after death through the doing of the marker. Matthias was assigned to retrieve the red marker for the church from the planet Aegis 7. This planet was quarantined ages ago by the Earth government. The CEC, or the Concordance Extraction Corporation, is a company that specializes in deep space mining. They created the Planet Cracker starships that Ishimura happens to be. These ships establish a colony on the planet to be mined and place gravity tethers around the surface in a ring-like shape. The starship then uses these tethers to pull a large chunk of the planet out, then mining it for resources. The CEC determined that Aegis 7 was rich with valuable resources, so they established a colony there. The employees on the planet discovered the red marker, but unfortunately, some unitologists were among them. The church was made aware, and many unitologists, including the captain, quickly took over the ranks of the project and Ishimura's crew. The unitologists took this opportunity to capture the red marker, possibly seeking the reason and method of their own creation. After the marker was discovered on the planet, though, the colonists began having severe and violent hallucinations. The same cases were reported on the ship once the marker was extracted. In some cases, people became homicidal and suicidal, probably leading to what happened with Nicole. During the same time the marker was uncovered, a growth began taking over the colony and the Ishimura, filling its ventilation systems. The planet crack went forward despite all this. As soon as the crack happened, the colony's power went out and they were flooded with attacks from a strange alien life form. These were the necromorphs, infecting the colonists and transforming them. Captain Matthias immediately cut off all traffic and communication with the colony. He didn't want the infection spreading to the ship. Dr. Kyne tried to convince the captain to send out a distress signal and stop the extraction, but he refused, wanting to get the marker to the church. Kyne tried to relieve the captain of his duties as he thought the captain was suffering a psychological break and clearly wasn't paying attention to the safety of the crew. He tried to sedate the man, but ended up killing him in the process. This could have been accidental, or just another symptom of the marker that was present on the ship. The infection spread to the ship by way of a shuttle that had escaped from the colony. A survivor had made its way to the Ishimura, not knowing that a necromorph had made its way onto the ship. The ship was sabotaged, all of the escape pods launched, but empty. A crew member eventually used their last moments to send out a distress signal. This was picked up by the CEC, who launched the Kellion to investigate. The Earth government eventually found out about the Ishimura being in a restricted system and dispatched agents to find out what was happening. This was Kendra Daniels' mission, to retrieve the marker for the Earth government. She was assisted by the USM Valor, the ship that tried to destroy the Ishimura. We find out at the end of the game that the red marker is a human creation. It was made using the original marker that had been found on Earth. The carvings in the side of the marker were the DNA instructions for the necromorph infection. The infection escaped and killed everyone on the original colony. The marker was abandoned on the planet, which is why the system was locked down by the Earth government in the first place. The story is mostly hidden through background notes and audio logs that can be found on the ship. A lot of these are optional and won't be found when just making a beeline through the place. It's certainly not as hidden as something like Silent Hill's story is, but it still requires some piecing together. Most of the information is given to us in a non-linear way, so we have to figure out the timeline, putting things in the correct places. It's a really interesting story behind it all, though, and isn't necessary to understand what happens in the game. It's just interesting lore that serves to flesh the world out further. Overall, Dead Space succeeds at what it originally set out to do. It tried to create a truly terrifying horror experience that would stand the test of time. Dead Space has aged incredibly well. It still feels like a modern game, and there's not a lot that I would even consider dated. Most of the innovative choices in design are what caused this. The lighting used to further push the atmosphere of the game prevents its textures from looking old. The in-world cutscenes, all being played on static transmissions from Isaac's suit, prevent too much detail from being noticed in the character models. The game's UI being placed in-world on your character's suit prevents design elements that were hot at the time being used, causing the game to appear less dated. All of these innovations serve their own purposes to further the game's standing in the horror genre. They make the player more immersed in the world to generate an atmosphere that terrifies but also intrigues. But they also serve the purpose of making the game still look great 14 years later. The gameplay of Dead Space is amazing, and it's tied into everything. The horror and the way the game functions go hand in hand. It's terrifying to play. Every corner we pass, every door we open, every dead body we see, we suspect of being a necromorph. We're truly alone on this ship, and we learn very early on that we cannot trust the game. We can't trust anyone. It's ruthless, and once we realize that, we know not to believe anything it throws at us. But Dead Space, even with that distrust, manages to throw scares and terrors at us that we aren't expecting. It teaches us to survive on this derelict, infected ship. It puts us through a trial by fire. The scares aren't lessened by the end of the game, and running away from enemies in Chapter 12 is still just as terrifying as in Chapter 1. But the game slowly makes us realize over the course of its playtime that it isn't holding anything back. It will be trying, purposefully, to terrify us at every point. The balance that we talked about before is on perfect display here. Dead Space creates the perfect illusion and makes you truly believe that you're in the shoes of Isaac Clarke on board the USG Ishimura. With that illusion intact, the game can then begin to throw terrifying situations at us that are all the more amplified because we believe in them. I do really enjoy Dead Space. There were a very few small nitpicks that I had, like the turret shooting sequences or the reused rooms, but they weren't anything that makes this an experience that you don't want to have. If you're a horror fan and haven't played Dead Space, it's absolutely required. Dead Space was very well received critically. It holds an 89 on Metacritic for the Xbox 360 version of the game. Most critics responded well to its innovations in gameplay, but some criticized its use of elements that felt like padding. Dead Space was nominated for 10 awards at NAV GTR and won 6. It won Best Audio at the Game Developers' Choice Awards. It was nominated for 4 categories at the British Academy Games Awards and won 2. It was nominated for 4 categories at the DICE Awards and won 2. It was a critical success, that's for sure. Most of its praise really came from its sound design being highly regarded among the community. But Dead Space didn't do very well in sales. It reached number 10 in game sales on release in the US. Sales would improve over time due to its critical success, but it was considered a commercial disappointment due to its release, even with heavy marketing. Despite this, EA still decided to move forward with a sequel, mostly because of the first game's critical success. But we'll talk about that next time. Bye, Dad.